Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. أما بعد فقال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتابه الكريم بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن صدق الله العظيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. So one of the traditions that I think every community and every masjid has is they offer some sort of advice, some sort of guidelines, and some sort of guidance as it pertains to the preparation for the month of Ramadan. And of course, this is actually one of the long-standing traditions and sunnahs of the Prophet ﷺ. We find in a number of narrations, for example, in the Shu'ab al-Iman of Imam al-Bayhaqi as well as Ibn al-Khuzaymah, that Salman al-Farisi radiallahu ta'ala anhu, the famous companion of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he narrates that خطبنا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم في آخر يوم من شعبان, that on the very last day of Sha'ban, before Ramadan began, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam gathered all of the Sahaba together, and he instructed them and advised them as to how to behave in Ramadan. And so what's interesting about that is that it was the very last night before Ramadan started. So you can imagine what kind of preparation they must be doing. It's the final stretch, right? And so one of the interesting points of benefit that we get from that is that it's never too late to start preparing. Even though Ramadan is a few days away, it's never too late to start preparing. And that was illustrated by the Prophet ﷺ in a very beautiful way. And so, alhamdulillah, we have some very beloved and some very senior and very creative, very dynamic guests with us today. And so without further delay, I wanted to actually request our resident Hafiz and Qari, Associate Imam, Hafiz Sajid, who doesn't require any introduction. Most of you know who he is, and no one can deny that beautiful, contagious smile that you come to the masjid, almost mischievous at times. And before we went live, though, I will admit in front of the entire community that Hafiz Sajid asked Sister Faduma what ayah number the particular passage was from. And just like this, she got it. So, I've been saying it all year, that you've got some competition and you need to watch your back. So, so the Prophet ﷺ actually says in a number of different versions of this narration that kullu amrin dhi bal, that whatever is of importance, lam yubda bi bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, if it's not begun with the name of God, then it lacks barakah, it lacks blessing. فَهُوَ أَبْتَرُ. So in order to inshallah bring some more barakah and some more blessing in this, what we hope to be a beneficial gathering, inshallah ta'ala, if you could begin with a brief recitation of some ayat of the Quran. Jazakumullah khair.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون أياما معدودات فمن كان منكم مريضا أو على سفر فعدة من أيام أخر وعلى الذين يطيقونه فدية طعام مسكين فمن تطوع خيرا فهو خير له وأن تصوموا خير لكم إن كنتم تعلمون شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن هدى للناس وبينات من الهدى والفرقان فمن شهد منكم الشهر فليصم ومن كان مريضا أو على سفر فعدة من أيام أخر يريد الله بكم اليسر ولا يريد بكم العسر ولتكملوا العدة ولتكبروا الله على ما هداكم ولعلكم تشكرون وإذا سألك عبادي عني فإني قريب أجيب دعوة الداعي إذا دعان فليستجيبوا لي وليؤمنوا بي لعلهم يرشدون صدق الله العظيم.
Sadaqallahu al-Azim. Jazakumullahu khairan and barakallahu feekum. So there's always this sort of contention within the community, right, as to what role the Quran plays in the life of a believer. And so, unfortunately, the reality is that for many of us, the Quran is a ceremonial thing. It's something that we recite in the beginning of weddings, in the beginning of programs, very similar to how we did right now. My perspective on the Quran has always kind of been that our relationship with the Quran is talked about in the Quran itself, right? And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that the Quran is described as Kitabun anzalnahu ilayk, that this is a book that was revealed to you, Mubarakun. So the Quran says that it is a Mubarak book. There's for sure, without a doubt, there is blessing in this book. The famous hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam talking about how much reward we get, the hasanat we get from reading the Quran. What was the example that he gave? He said, for every letter you read, you get a reward. Not alif, lam, mim is one letter. Rather, alif is one, lam is one, and mim is one. And so you get rewarded even if you don't even know the meaning, right? And so, although there is undeniable barakah in the Quran, Allah says, Kitabun anzalnahu ilayk mubarakun, then immediately thereafter, in the same breath, He says, liyadabbaru ayatihi. That while it has barakah, for sure, it should be pondered upon. It should be reflected upon. There is a lesson in the Quran. And so, as you beautifully recited, Ramadan and the Quran are interlinked in a very inseparable way. Shahru Ramadan, alladhi unzila fihi al-Quran. The month of Ramadan is the month in which the Quran was revealed. And so, to begin with, I wanted to ask Hafiz Sajid to kind of share a few just preliminary brief thoughts about, the relationship between Ramadan and the Quran. For the past several years, you've been leading Taraweeh at the Masjid. People have enjoyed your recitation, but I don't think a lot of people truly appreciate the journey that you took in terms of memorizing it, studying it, and you're continuing to go on that journey. So inshallah, if you could kind of shed some light on that, the importance of the Quran in the month of Ramadan, and how can we as a community connect to the Quran, inshallah.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillahi wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. So today, as Imam Sahib actually asked and mentioned before, he specifically wanted me to talk about the journey that I took on as when I was younger. I mean, I'm still younger, right? So I can't say when I was a kid, because technically I'm still a kid, but when I was younger, in the journey I took on when I began memorizing the Quran, the track that my parents put me on and kind of pushed me towards in the journey, and the amount of effort and the amount of himma that it took to memorize the Quran and further educate oneself on the different ways of reciting the Quran and Islamic studies. So initially, when I was about 8 years old, my parents sent me to a madrasa in Buffalo. And it was really far away from home. So it was really tough as well. And I was 8 years old. So you can imagine how that went. I barely knew how to take care of myself properly. So I was there for about a year, alhamdulillah. And that's where I...
By yourself completely?
Completely by myself. No friends, no family, in the middle of Buffalo, New York. It was actually ironic. Sheikh Mikhail was there. He was doing his alim course during that time. So he was actually one of the elder, like we call them like the Amir Sahib. He was the Amir Sahib, like of their like of that madrasa, kind of, in terms of like the people. He would like take care of the younger students and stuff and look out for them. So I mean, like that's how as you probably know, Anwer, whenever he calls us out in class, or at least me. But so I was there for about a year, and that year was really, really tough and rough because of the fact that, because I was super young, I missed my parents a lot, obviously, for obvious reasons. I couldn't see them. Eating was tough. I actually got like diagnosed with high cholesterol and like all these other sicknesses like thyroid imbalances because of the fact that the food was just so bad. But it was an experience, and the fact that I was still able to sit down there and learn these ahkam of tajweed and be able to spend time with the Quran, read it, recite it, and learn to the best of my ability in that situation was honestly a gift, and something that I would never give up for anything else in this entire dunya. And then shortly after that, I was there for about a year, and then my parents took me out. I after that went and studied in a smaller madrasa in New York City, and I lived with my aunt. But that didn't work out pretty well because it just wasn't happening. So then I actually came back home. I studied there in that smaller madrasa for about like 3 months, and it was just a rough experience. It was like really bad. And then I actually ended up coming home, going back to school for a few years, and then I decided that I started this one thing. I was like, might as well go and finish it. So then I actually went to Darul Uloom, New York, in Jamaica, and alhamdulillah, once I went there, it was actually, out of all the madaris that I've been to, it was probably the worst living conditions there. So I was there for about 2.5 to 3 years, and so when I went there, I completely started over, learning alif ba ta tha properly, with like one singular teacher having me memorize all the rules, everything, you know what I mean? Like every single thing, you have to memorize it, you have to know it off the back of your hand. So I started off there. I spent 1 year learning how to recite the Quran properly, and then after that, I went into the Hifz program. I was in that Hifz program for about two years. However, it was very on and off because I was that kid who was always getting sick and going home. So alhamdulillah, though, with the tawfiq of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I was able to finish and then further my Islamic education here in Dallas, Texas, and I'm still here. But what I wanted to specifically talk about, though, was the idea of being able to connect yourself to the Quran, right? And then go into how do we connect ourselves to the Quran. Number one, in order to connect yourself to anything, you have to understand the value of that thing in your life. You have to understand the core value that brings and represents to you as a human being. And without understanding that, no single human being will be able to love something or be able to attach themselves to one thing. If they don't understand the value of it, why would you go after it, right? In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that ayah, شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن هدى للناس. Now, this is a phrase that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually uses quite often in the Quran. هدى للناس, or هدى لل whoever, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this ayah specifically says that this month, شهر رمضان, the month of Ramadan, is a month in which شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent down the Quran, meaning this is the month in which revelation had started. أنزل فيه القرآن هدى للناس. And that revelation, this Quran, this Kalamullah al-Mu'jiz, isn't just something that is recited, isn't just something that was sent down, but it's something that's also a guide for people. هدى للناس. And notice how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said people. He didn't specify who this book is for, but he said just for people in general. No matter if you know how to recite the Quran, you don't even believe in Allah. Regardless of that, regardless of what point you're at, this Quran is for every single human being. وَبَيِّنَاتٍ مِنَ الْهُدَى وَالْفُرْقَانِ. Right? And that this is a clear guide. It's supposed to be a sort of clarification to show you, right? The word bayina kind of alludes to the fact that when someone's in like a cloudy or a very murky environment and they can't see what's in front of them, bayina is when all of that is removed and they're returned back to the asl. They're returned back to that part in which there was absolutely nothing. So basically square zero. And at square zero, everything's just neutral, right? So for that reason, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, bayinat min al-huda wal-furqan, that this is supposed to give you clarity in your lives as well. And then in another part of the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in Surah Al-Baqarah in the absolute beginning, right? ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابِ, right? Now, we have this Quran that was revealed to us, and it's supposed to be a guidance for people. Okay, now, what is that supposed to mean? Like, what do I do with that? How do I use it to guide me, right? Do I just read it? Do I try to understand it? What's it for? What type of people is it for? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answers that question as well, right? He says, هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ, that this book, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابِ, number one, that this book has absolutely no doubt, لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ. And what is it? هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. It's a guidance for those people who have taqwa, who have consciousness of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants for them. But if you actually go a little deeper into that word muttaqeen, what that alludes to is the fact that a person who has yaqeen, who has certainty, who knows that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who provides for them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who gives them everything. And now to give you kind of like a small vision before I get into, how to kind of connect to the Quran, because if you honestly YouTube how to connect to the Quran, you'll probably find way more videos than I could ever, try to relate to you. But as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, right, هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ, that this idea of yaqeen, being absolutely certain in something, is an idea that nothing can break, nothing can shatter. And you look at examples of the Anbiya, right? You look at Ibrahimee alayhi salam, when he was sick and he raised his hands to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and what did he say? وَإِذَا مَرِضْتُ فَهُوَ يَشْفِينِ. That when I was sick, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who constantly gave me cure. Because he had yaqeen in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that cure would come to him. So for that reason, this book is something that we as human beings, we as Muslimun, people who submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we as mu'minun absolutely believe in as believers and implement it into our lives. And now how are you going to implement something if you don't know how to read it or understand it? Now getting to the main crux of the whole discussion of how to connect to the Quran in the month of Ramadan, many of you may be thinking that, man, we have 30 days. Maybe I won't be able to read the whole thing. I barely read Quran for the rest of the year, which isn't a problem. Like that's what it is. As human beings, our nafs are weak, right? That are you people not of those who just follow your desires, run after those things you want? And truly we are, right? And there's nothing wrong with that, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one who forgives, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who forgives. So it's not about where you're coming from, but about what you can do and the sincerity you have to change yourself. So for a person who's starting off and for a person who doesn't know where to start, understand that no matter what it is you do, the main purpose and goal of Ramadan, right? The main purpose and goal of this blessed Mubarak month is to get started, right? It's a month in which shaitan is locked up, right? So you have 11 months of the year in which shaitan's constantly poking at you, right? Sajid, do this. Sajid, come on. You'll review your Quran tomorrow. Ramadan's still 6 months away. Or Sajid, don't worry. Tomorrow you won't get called on in class. You don't have to study, right? All these things, right? Shaitan's constantly poking me, right? And in 1 month, that one specific month in which shaitan is locked up and all distractions are gone, to the point where you just have your nafs poking at itself, because that's just a habit. It's a habit that you've adopted in your life. And I'm honestly first and foremost talking about myself before anyone else, obviously. But that whole idea of breaking out of your nafs and understanding that now everything you do is because of what you want and not because of someone else poking you, right? The number one, what is it? Anwer, Imam Sab, you could correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in like Alcoholics Anonymous or something, like AA meetings, like the first step of getting over an addiction, or the first step of whatever, is admitting that you have a sickness, right? And that goes not just for alcoholics, or that goes for everyone, and no matter what it is, whether it's small or big, right? So if you understand that, you know what, okay, the whole year I didn't do it
unless you think you're sick, right? To begin with.
Exactly, right? So it starts off by, the whole year I haven't been able to live up to this title that I've given myself as a Muslim, this izzah that I've given myself as a Muslim. But this month of Ramadan has come, and now I am going to take it upon myself to change, because I know that I am capable of that. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told me that I'm capable of that, because that idea came into my head, right? What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say in the Quran? La yukallifullah, right? Nafsan illa wusaha. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't give anyone a burden or a responsibility or even an idea that they can't handle. If it comes to you, that means you're able to do it, right? So the first step is to identify where I'm at. Now, for an example, for me specifically, it's like, okay, I've memorized the Quran. Okay, I now need to start reviewing it so I could, either lead the prayers in Ramadan for Taraweeh or whatever it may be. And me personally, one of the weaknesses I have is not really doing tadabbur and tafakkur on the Quran, not really thinking about it. So what's my steps gonna be? I'm gonna sit down every single day and make a schedule that whether it's one ayat, two ayat, while I'm reviewing, if it's a page or 2 pages, I'm just gonna go through the translation, sit down and think about it. Think about the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And to be completely honest, for those people who want to set really, really high and lofty goals for themselves, that, you know, I am gonna set out and I'm gonna read the entire Quran and I'm gonna try to memorize X, Y, and Z surahs, don't overburden yourself. There has to be gradualism, because if you just, you know, sprint it out, you're gonna be tired 3 seconds in, right? Who was the famous saying? I mean, I'm not old enough to be able to recall what is it, like the rabbit and the turtle or something.
Slow and steady wins the race.
Yeah, exactly, right? I'm sorry, I always have to take shots wherever I can. But
let me touch on something you began with. You go to Buffalo at the age of 8, right? You're barely 10 years old. You're not even in double digits when it comes to age, right? You're in godforsaken Buffalo, New York, where it's just, you know, it's snowing in springtime. You know what I mean? So, and you're probably thinking to yourself, like, where am I? What am I doing? Is this journey even worth it? Right? So, and I think a lot of people, although we may not have all gone to Buffalo, New York to memorize the Quran, but I think everyone can kind of relate to having a Quran teacher early on in life, or having a relationship with the Quran that was kind of like antagonistic, right? Like being forced. And so to any people who have that kind of baggage and their relationship with the Quran, every time they look at a book like this, they remember the beatings, they remember being forced to read it, they remember essentially being told to read at gunpoint, right? Does the journey ever get better? At what point in your life did you begin to realize, you know what, this is actually a blessing? It's actually a joy to read the Quran. I like reading it.
So when
it's upon starting your journey, right? So I think a lot of people may have that mental barrier. I'd love to start my journey, but you know, my relationship with the Quran has always been so negative. So what kind of advice would you have for people like that?
So if I'm going to be completely honest, the advice I'd have for people like that is, so talking about myself specifically, when initially I was forced to go to madrasa by my parents, basically, like I kind of developed that relationship with the Quran. It's like, yo, because of this book, it's like I have to go through all of this extra stuff for no reason. Like I have to live away from home, I have to leave school, I have to leave all of my friends behind. Like, what's the point? What am I doing this for? Right? And having that baggage stick with you to the point where, like, bro, you're in the middle of like this room, right, with like 7 other kids sleeping on like bunk beds, and it's like, yo, I left so much for this book, and who do I have to blame for this? Not my parents. Why are they making me do it? Because for some odd reason they like this book and they want me to memorize it. What's the point behind it? And at some point you have to rationalize, right? You have to sit down and really think, who am I? Why am I doing this? And why am I here? Right? Why am I in this dunya? Once a person can ask themselves that question and develop a perspective that, man, I'm gonna die one day. It might be 5 seconds from now, it might be 2 days from now, or it might be 50 years from now. Allahu Ta'ala a'lam. But the fact that I know that I'm gonna pass away one day, all those struggles, all those extra things, they fall off. You forget about them. That baggage you had when you're sitting down being forced to read Quran, or sitting down being forced to do an X, Y, and Z thing, but ultimately that thing is actually good for you, because you know that that thing contains answers that you have in your head and you've had in your head all your life, but you just are too scared to open it up because of your own ego, and the fact that, you know, I'm not going to open it up because it harmed me. It's like, it didn't do anything to you. Someone else did that because they understood it differently, but the book never did anything to you. And when you're able to objectively open the Quran, right, and forget about reading it, right, just trying to understand the translation. And that's one thing I stress so much. Forget about reading it, forget about learning how to read it right now. First, develop a love for it. First, develop that muhabba. And this time of Ramadan is that time to develop the muhabba for it. Open it up, read a translation, see how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks to you. See how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you examples to just to look outside, just look at the trees, look at the water. Honestly, look at the ecosystem, look how it works. And once a person is able to see that and really understand and objectively look at the Quran and what it means for them and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives them perspective of life and the dunya and everything around them, then that person's undefeatable. That person, there's going to be no ego. And they're going to begin to not care about anything but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And wallahi, once a person gets to that place, and obviously that place, it wavers. You're never going to be fully balanced at that place. Why? Because we're human beings. We're weak. Like, things happen, right? A person gets hit with some type of musibah, some type of calamity. What's going to happen? They're going to break, right? But then what are they going to do? They know who to go back to. They know where to go. They know to open up the Quran and read it. They know to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for help. And when that person is able to constantly do that, that's when their iman and yaqeen becomes so strong that it becomes undefeated. But how do you start that? How do you get there? By first trying to have that muhabba of the Quran, trying to have that muhabba of kalamullah. I hope that answers the question.
One thing that I emphasized a lot even last year is, if anything that should change in Ramadan is your curiosity of the religion, right? It's not bad to actually have questions about the religion. And that's most people. We have baggage, we've got backgrounds, people have gone through a lot. And I think that the people who come to the Quran objectively and they read it looking for guidance, right? Because the Quran is a guidance. It offers divine solutions to people's problems. It gives you a divine perspective through which to look at the world. And having said that, I think that what basically you're emphasizing is the Quran can be beneficial regardless of what your level is. Whether you can read it fluently, whether you cannot. Everyone can benefit something from the Quran. It's all about starting your journey. So to kind of conclude your section of this, could you kind of talk about what specifically the Masjid is going to be doing this Ramadan? Is there a way that we can tune in and actually hear you reciting and read along with you, throughout the month?
So inshallah, specifically this Ramadan, due to the current circumstances that we're in, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us and make it easy for all of us and allow us to come back to our Masjid. Ameen. So what we're going to be doing, inshallah, myself and Imam Anwer, is that we're planning on releasing videos, basically, of the Taraweeh, the recitation of the Taraweeh, not the actual prayer, of the Taraweeh, like the recitation, the Qira'ah. And what's going to be happening is I'm going to be reciting the appointed juz for that night, and then Imam Anwer is going to be giving a khatira either on that juz or on a excuse me, I'm blanking,
or a brief reminder of that.
Yeah, a brief reminder on a topic or a subject that we choose or he feels most comfortable with. But inshallah, it's going to be tailored to the Quran specifically, so we could benefit from that as well.
Yeah, and regardless of what ends up happening with the virus or whether the Masjid opens or not, the service of having like a multimedia resource where you can open up the Quran and follow along to a trained, Qari is something that I think will be awesome. And also to have like a reminder to go along with it, a translation of the verses, etc. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, increase our relationship with the Quran this month. I know that's on the list of, every Muslim, every community member. And unfortunately, I think this message of just starting your journey is not emphasized enough. That you don't have to, oh, by the way, one question I wanted to ask you, is it mandatory for someone to finish the entire Quran in the month of Ramadan? If you know that you don't recite fluently enough, or your schedule is such that you just know you can't do it, is it okay to apportion a small part of the Quran and just have that be your goal? And are there different types of khatmas of the Quran? Can you make a khatma by reading? Can you make a khatma by listening, by studying? Right? So if you could touch upon that as well, inshallah.
Yeah, so number one, no, it's absolutely not necessary. It's not compulsory to read the entire Quran in the month of Ramadan. That's a recommendation. And as for a person who does absolutely want to do a khatam of the Quran, look, honestly, if I'm gonna be completely honest, don't. It's not worth your time. If you're just absolutely starting off, or you're someone who, if they want to do a khatam of Quran reading is going to take them 10 hours a day of reciting Quran, absolutely, if you have the scope and the ability to do it, do it. But if not, you don't want to overburden yourself, because the point of Ramadan isn't to only read Quran in Ramadan. I want you to start reading Quran in Ramadan and read it until next Ramadan. Read it throughout the year. Because Ramadan isn't the month that, you get super souped up and then you're good for the rest of the year. Sure, that idea is there, but the idea of Ramadan is to get you started, is to start that flow. It's a month in which there are no distractions, everything's removed from you, shaitan's gone. You beat your nafs down, and then you refresh it, right? You empty it out. You take out whatever is bad in there, khalas, right? You clean it out, and then you pour Quran in there. You purify yourself so that you're good and you're able to consistently train yourself until next Ramadan, and constantly do that. That's a cycle, right? That's why consistency is key. But no, reciting Quran in its entirety is not necessary. I'd say understanding it is. Understanding it is necessary, absolutely. But if you want to do any other type of khatam, you could listen to it. You could sit down next to someone who's reciting it and just, try to follow along with them, right? You could recite it yourself. If you want to recite it in salah, mashallah, bit tawfiq, go ahead.
Well, jazakumullah khair, barakallah feek.
Jazakallah khair, I really appreciate it.
As well, and so whenever you want to sign off, you're free to. I don't want to hold you up. I know you got some meetings and stuff like that afterwards. So I wanted to actually move on to the portion of the program that I'm particularly very, very excited for. We have the distinct honor and blessing and privilege of having with us Sister Faduma. And before I actually have her kind of chime in and jump into the conversation, as we're talking about preparing for Ramadan, no matter how many times you prepare or how early you prepare, I don't think anyone could have anticipated a Ramadan the likes of which we're probably going to be seeing in the next couple of weeks. And so given the fact that the next few weeks, even months, could be just a very, very unique situation, I decided to actually bring on someone whose knowledge and whose creativity, whose involvement in the community I've come to greatly admire and respect. Sister Faduma holds a BA in English from the great state of Minnesota, University of Minnesota. She's an Alimia candidate in the Islamic Scholarship Program at the Colleyville Institute, as well as she's serving as Senior Administrator at the Yaqeen Institute for Islamic Research. And so you're an awfully busy person with a whole bunch of just webinars and meetings and research going on. And so despite your busy schedule, thank you so much for joining us. And so once again, I've really come to admire and respect what you contribute to the community. And we've had a couple of conversations before about just how unique this Ramadan is going to be for everybody. And I know that you've been having conversations like this with your colleagues and with your teachers as well. So inshallah, to start off with, if you could kind of just give us some thoughts about, how unique this Ramadan is going to be and what advice you potentially could have for the community in regards to how we can prepare best for it, inshallah.
Absolutely. Jazakallah khair for that introduction. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu wa salam ala Sayyidil Mursaleen. Wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Allahumma allimna ma yanfa'una wa anfa'na bima 'allamtana wa zidna ilma. This Ramadan, as you said, Imam Anwer, it's something that none of us could have prepared for. And I mean, people start preparing for Ramadan by making up their fast, by getting in the habit of fasting. And COVID-19 Ramadan is something that none of us were preparing for. In fact, the past 2 Ramadans, I've been in Dallas. And so my family lives here in Minnesota. And so I was, mentally preparing myself for just another Ramadan away from family, in school, although we still will be in school. And it just shows you not just the control that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has, but just how in an instant, everything that you thought could have been, that you planned for could just be flipped upside down, right? It really is an opportunity to reflect and to humble ourselves about how we plan and Allah plans, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the blessed of planners. But that doesn't necessarily mean that because of this change in plans, and even thinking about it that way, change in plans, like the plans were already set. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had already planned for this Ramadan to be as unique as it is going to be. It's just our perspective. From our perspective, it's not what we were expecting, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be, it has to go in a waste bin, right? That everything that we had planned, all the effort that we were going to put in, any of that has to go to waste. It's beautiful because it just shows us how the different ways in which we can reach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For many people, when they think about Ramadan, the association that they have is Masjid, right? The praying in the Masjid, doing i'tikaf in the Masjid, going for Taraweeh, going for iftar. Many people have iftar in the Masjid. And it just shows that, a lot of our worship, which, I mean, very much so, it's not something that we should be ashamed of. It's not something that we should, shy away from, but it is something to reconsider, right? That we are people who worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We have a connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And that connection needs to be something that, stays within Ramadan and outside of Ramadan, within the Masjid, outside of the Masjid, right? And so this Ramadan is going to be, and everyone's saying this, right? Everyone, it's not something that no one is unaware of. This Ramadan is going to be very different. But what can we do to anticipate that difference? And how can we better prepare ourselves? I think that's an important conversation to have, because we all have unique experiences. We all have unique backgrounds. We all have unique capacities, right? And how merciful is our Allah, that, the same Ramadan, the same Allah that is inside this beautiful month of Ramadan is the same Allah outside of the beautiful month of Ramadan. However, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is more concerned about the effort that we're putting in. So what is that effort? I think is an important conversation to have.
Yes. And specifically about that, last year we had a very comprehensive Welcome Ramadan program. It spanned like 3 weeks, and we had like 4 or 5 guest speakers. One of the topics that I was very excited to present was called Ramadan in the Home. And subhanAllah, looking back at it, it's so much more relevant this year than ever before. So I know, so currently you're back home in Minnesota.
I am.
Got like almost 10 people living at home, got a bunch of siblings, brothers and sisters. So specifically for people who are going to be just cooped up in their homes throughout the month, they're going to be fasting in the daytime, potentially even praying Taraweeh, in their homes. So how can we as families kind of make Ramadan as beneficial as possible? If you could, inshallah, share what thoughts you had about that, or maybe even what y'all are doing. So it's easier for you guys because you guys have some weather to deal with as well.
Yeah, subhanAllah. If I can share, my first Ramadan, if I can share just my experience. My first Ramadan away from family, it was something that I think was very difficult, right? Very difficult. My whole life, I was with my family during Ramadan, fasting with my family, going to the Masjid with my family, doing everything together, right? And alhamdulillah, I moved to Dallas about 2.5 years ago. And so the first Ramadan, more than half of Ramadan was in Dallas. And so, I was breaking my fast not by myself, with my friends, my roommates, but still a lot smaller. I was cooking iftar for myself or for my roommates. I was going to the Masjid. There was by myself, perhaps because I had, my roommates would go to different masajid or maybe had different plans. And, it was a very different feeling, and I realized how much it meant to me, how significant it was to be with my family. That was definitely something that we made, although we weren't praying inside of our home, we were still breaking our fasts together. We were having suhoor together. We were going out and driving to the Masjid together and doing post Taraweeh things together, right? Grabbing ice cream or things like that. And so now I just think about that, how beautiful and just the blessing of being back here, although it is a very significant change to what I particularly anticipated. I definitely thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for bringing me back home during this time, despite everything going on. but it is very much going to pose a challenge. And that's, I think, something all of us have realized being at home. There's, so many webinars and lectures about just kind of dealing with family and dealing with spouses and dealing with siblings and, how to manage time and how to create, productivity in the home and stuff like that. And I think there's so much to be said about how we can, properly prepare for Ramadan in the home. And I think that it definitely depends on everyone's capacity, the home. You were saying, I have, alhamdulillah, there's 8 of us. So I'm the eldest of my siblings. And so there's 8 of us in the home, plus my 2 parents. And we have pets. We have 2 cats, right? And so
I'm just gonna mention that.
Yeah, you have to include them, right? And so it's a full house, alhamdulillah. And finding the last few weeks, almost a month, finding my own space, creating my own workspace, creating somewhere I can do my schoolwork, my homework, somewhere that we can as a family have some time together, play games, and kind of hone in on that has been great. But I've been thinking ahead, for the past several weeks about, well, what are you going to do during Ramadan? Yes, we're going to be breaking our fast together. Yes, we're going to make suhoor together. But what about worship? What about ibadah together? And what is that going to look like? Because we very much depended on the masjid. And so I decided to create a schedule for my family about what are some things that we can do together to increase that spiritual connection, but also bring us together as a family. It's beautiful to see. One of the things about the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ that you find is that the Prophet ﷺ prayed all his sunnah at home, right? And it's beautiful to just to show that yes, we have our communal obligations outside of the home in the masjid, right? But the Prophet ﷺ would pray his sunnah at home to show us kind of that precedence, right? That there also needs to be something going on at home that is of a spiritual nature. The Prophet ﷺ mentioned, a house that Surah Baqarah is not recited in, right? Like, do not let your homes become like graves, right? And so it's important to understand that there is a lot to be said about, the worship that goes on inside the home and the emphasis the Prophet ﷺ has put on that. So what are some things that we can do as a family? I think is an important conversation to have within every family, because like I said, capacity is different. We have families who are working from home. My parents are working from home. My siblings are doing school from home. I'm doing school from home. So we all have different schedules, but what are some things that we can do to make sure that we're also participating with one another, that we're also getting closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So I sent a little kind of like survey out to my siblings and to my parents in our family, group chat about like, what are some things that you're looking to achieve this Ramadan? This Ramadan, no matter of fact, it's going to be different. There's nothing we can do about that. But what are some goals that you're trying to achieve? And figuring out, are the goals that I'm setting as an individual, myself, Faduma, are my goals in alignment with the goals that my family has? And if they are, then where can we meet together? Because, for example, you might want to, mashallah, do a khatma of the Quran twice during this Ramadan. Perhaps that's your goal, mashallah, right? Like Imam Shafi'i, rahimahullah, like you're trying to he would actually do it twice a day. But if you were, mashallah, trying to do something twice this month, for example, then maybe your goals aren't in alignment with your father, for example, who's maybe just, he's trying to do tadabbur, right? He's like, if I can do one, I'll be great. If I can do half, that'd be even better with tadabbur, right? So finding out what's in alignment with your siblings, your family, your spouses, and figuring out, okay, well, where are the commonalities? Maybe praying together, as a family. Maybe that's a big thing. I know that's a big thing for my family. And so we decided, okay, we're going to pray together. All 5 prayers while we're in the house together, we're going to pray at these specific times when the salah comes in, or maybe we'll have a time where this is the iqamah time, for example. And so, making our house very similar to the masjid in that regard. Another thing perhaps could be, we're going to have iftar together as a family, but instead of just having a certain, number of people preparing the meals, maybe we can just have like, you know, people assigned certain days of the week to prepare food, right? That way we're all getting in the reward of feeding fasting people, right? And so we have to be really creative in how we're, you know, maximizing our deeds this month, because obviously we're not able to be in the masjid. But it's beautiful just to see that, you know, the paths to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are vast, right? We just have to kind of be creative in that way. And anything, honestly, at the end of the day, anything that you intend for goodness, you will receive goodness. Hal jaza'u al-ihsani illa al-ihsan, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward us for the goodness that we intend on, so long as we, you know, are intentional about it, so long the effort is there, right? And so that's one thing I've been, you know, just kind of repeating over and over to my siblings and to my family, is just, you know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cares about your effort. This Ramadan for sure is not going to be the same as last Ramadan, but Allah is not looking for, you know, a crazy spike in worship. Allah is not looking to see, you know, you were praying your 5 daily prayers and maybe a few nawafil, and now mashallah, you're praying all night, you know, the 30 days. Allah appreciates that. I'm sure Allah, you know, appreciates that, but Allah is also looking for something that's consistent, you know, khairul a'mali ilallahi adwamuha wa in qal, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves consistency. And so how are we creating consistent environments in our homes and allowing for our family members, our beloved members of the family in the home to kind of also participate alongside us?
You know, it's funny you mentioned your story. We hear these narrations all the time of the Prophet ﷺ saying things like, you know, إِنَّمَا جُعِلَتِ الْأَرْضُ مَسْجِدًا وَطُهُورًا, that the entire earth has been made a masjid for me. You know, and you mentioned the same Lord who we worship inside of Ramadan is still living and never perishing outside of Ramadan. The same Lord that we worship inside of the masjid is available to listen to our du'as even outside of the masjid. And those ahadith about making your homes masajid is just, it's so real now, you know, given our situation. And, you know, personally for me, this crisis that we find ourselves in, I mean, I think the more weeks we go through it, it just starts becoming more, I start viewing it more as an opportunity, you know, and with all due respect to the people who are obviously suffering from this, but even it's an opportunity for everybody to kind of recalibrate what's important. And I remember a couple of years ago, I signed up for some like away rotation. These are electives that you do at visiting kind of institutes. And I didn't realize that Ramadan was around the corner. I just sort of scheduled them. What ended up happening was, in the beginning of Ramadan, I was in one city. In the end of Ramadan, I was in a different city. In the middle of Ramadan, I was in a different city altogether. So that throughout that entire month, I had no family and no community, right? And I realized how much I depended on those two. I mean, Ramadan was the community. Ramadan was family, right? And then in the absence of those two things, I remember a few years back, I actually looked into this concept of how did some of our pious predecessors kind of spend their Ramadans. And I was very surprised, actually, to see that very, very senior Sahaba, like Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, radiallahu anhu, he preferred to pray Tarawih at home. You know, like even despite the fact that there was Jama'ah going on at the masjid. Aisha radiallahu anha, she led a congregation of women, you know, throughout Ramadan. That's what she used to do. And so certainly this situation may be unique to our times, but the concept of like Ramadan connecting to the basics of Ramadan, you know, in the home, like you mentioned, that's not a foreign concept at all. And right from the very beginning of Islam, there were some Sahaba who from the very beginning really, I think, got it.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know? And one advice that you mentioned, family goal setting, which is really something I actually wrote it down. It's really intriguing. I think I'm going to do that with my family.
Absolutely.
I'll send out a survey to see what people are, what their goals might be in Ramadan, and see where we overlap and where we can potentially help each other. And where we might not overlap. So absolutely.
And it's fine, you know, in not having all of the goals overlap. That's one thing that I, you know, kind of was sharing with my family, is that, you know, it's obviously, it just kind of shows how unique we are, right? There are so many different ways to get to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we're all at different levels, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we can't support each other where we are. And so and I also pose it as an opportunity for myself and for my family, that, you know, we don't always have to be kind of in unison on everything. That there's private personal worship that I'm going to have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala this Ramadan, that that not even maybe, that for sure people in my family aren't going to know about, because Ramadan is an opportunity for that seclusion, for that, closeness with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's unique that this Ramadan, we're obviously not going to have the masjid, and we're not going to have those opportunities, but that doesn't necessarily mean that closeness with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is unattainable, that opportunity to become close with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to have that seclusion, that i'tikaf, that's something that we were talking about as well too, is that just because i'tikaf in the masjid is not possible, does that mean that it's not possible in our homes, right? Just because we can't, not even from a fiqh perspective, but just what is the purpose of i'tikaf, right? What are we trying to attain from secluding ourselves in the masjid for 10 days? Well, we're trying to attain a closeness with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, some opportunity to isolate ourselves from all the distractions. Well, can we create environments in our homes where that still is attainable, right? Obviously, it's not a masjid, and that can be set aside, but are we still able to dedicate hours on end reciting Quran, making dhikr, doing tadabbur, making dua, right? Praying salawat. Can we do sending salawats? Like, is there going to be opportunities in our homes to do this? And I think that there is. I think it's just a matter of shifting perspective and creating those goals and being realistic with those goals as well.
Yeah, this issue of like secluding yourself, and the whole issue of khalwa and being by yourself, even before Revelation started. You know this very well, that one of the first things that the Prophet Aisha radiallahu anha actually narrates in Sahih al-Bukhari, the Prophet said, "Hubba bi alayya al-khala," that seclusion was made beloved to me as a means of preparing himself to receive the Quran, right? So there will always be an element of your worship that's private, and that's private even from the closest people to you, even your own family. The famous narration of the Prophet praying tahajjud and nafil at night. One of the narrations mentioned he actually tapped the feet of Aisha radiallahu anha because his room was too small. You can either sleep or pray. You can't do both, right? So he kind of tap her to move her feet so he could make sajda properly. But what does that show? That she was using that time to rest and he was praying.
Yep, absolutely.
So they had two different schedules, despite the fact that they lived in the same room. Speaking of that, so this Ramadan is going to be unique in that we've got a bunch of people working from home now.
Yeah,
we've got kids at home as well.
Yep.
And schools aren't exactly out yet, so they're learning remotely. How important is it for people to dedicate a place in their home as like a musalla? This is where we pray as a family, right? Because I know a lot of people they're just sick and tired of just sitting in one spot all day. They go to social media, they're on their laptops. You go to work, you're on your laptop. And so you're just sort of sitting in one place. And then if your mushaf is on your laptop, it's just sort of, everything becomes monotonous. So is there a way to kind of introduce variety in our worship, or even dedicate a place in our home where we can be like, okay, if someone wants to make dua, if someone wants to read Quran, if someone wants to pray, this is going to be the musalla of our home. And is there precedence for this in the sunnah as well? So if you could kind of maybe talk about that for a little bit, or maybe even what y'all are doing in your home.
Yeah.
You guys are praying together in Jama'ah as well. So
Yeah. No, they say this a lot in terms of just kind of productivity. Like a lot of people who speak, who are experts in that field, like having a space that's dedicated to your work or your school flow, that's very separate from where you sleep, that's separate from where you eat, that's separate from all of those places, because you want that to represent exactly what you're aiming for, right? So I'm looking for productivity in my work. I can't do this in my bedroom, right? I'm not going to work because I associate sleep in here. And so I'm not going to do any of that. Same thing goes for, you know, schoolwork. Same thing goes, and I would apply the same thing with our prayer, right? If and obviously acknowledging, you know, you have to acknowledge your home, you know, the space that you have in your home. If you have the capacity to dedicate a space that, you know, obviously it's not going to be the size of our masajid, right? It's not going to have to be a musalla, but it's going to be a space that you can perhaps put, you know, your sajada, your prayer mats there, maybe some tasbih. Maybe you can just, you know, masahif like Quran, that way that this place is conducive to worship. Obviously not saying that this place is the only place in your home where you're going to be praying or you're going to be doing any type of worship, but creating that space is so important, because then again, I can decide like when I'm doing my work and then Dhuhr comes in, I'm not going to just stand up and be like, oh, I'm going to pray, because I do have a like a sajada in my room, but I like to take that sajada out and go to that prayer area, because the prayer that I'm going to be praying right now on my, you know, small break that I'm going to give myself for prayer is not going to be the same as the prayer. And that's for many of us, right? Because we just are thinking about work, we're thinking about school, we're thinking about all the daily things. We need that reminder, you know? And I know that this is something that in a lot of, like, we don't have it in our house. Inshallah, hopefully we can get something like this, but my cousins, my grandmother, family, my different relatives of mine, they have like an actual like adhan, which is pretty cool, because although you can obviously do your own adhan, but it's just cool to show like there's something that's going off. That is a big reminder. We have it on our phones too, but I think having something like where it's like a general reminder, like it's time to pray, drop everything and get up and pray, right? And I think that is important. Having that standard is important, just kind of like goal setting with your family, but also just dropping everything. Like, we don't do that enough, you know. We a lot of times are just like, so we're in the zone for an hour or 30 minutes or however long of just workflow. Salah comes in and we are probably most in need of it at that moment, right? And so having kind of that opportunity or that area that's designated for just going to go there and worship with your family is really important, because then also you're telling your family there while you're in there, is like, you can't talk to me right now while you're there, right? Like, this is my time that I'm making dua, this is my time that I'm making dhikr. Sometimes you know, you might be praying in your room, your door's closed, nobody knows that you're praying in your room. So people might knock, come ask you for things, and so on and so forth. So having a space that's designated, obviously it's optional. I do think that it is very much a benefit if everyone, you know, folks have that space. But if you don't have that space, because that is a reality, then what can you do? You know, for what can you do if you don't have that space in your home? Then the space that you do have, that, you know, sajada that you have in your room, then just make sure that when you drop everything, you know how they say in a dear time when you're in middle school or elementary school, drop everything and read. Trying to create some semblance of that with prayer as well too. Drop everything, you know, make wudu. These are ways that you can prepare yourself for salah. You might already have your wudu, right, from the previous prayer. Go and make wudu again, right? Prepare yourself mentally for your prayer, right? A lot of times we'll just go ahead and just, you know, start praying and get it done, right? But creating that environment or creating some routine, if you don't necessarily have the environment, creating some routine that's going to also mentally and practically prepare you for that prayer, I think is a different shift as well.
So I wanted to actually ask you also about, since we're talking about Ramadan in the home, do you guys, I'm wondering, have a culture of maybe like decorating the home for Ramadan and making it more lively, more festive, and possibly, you know, doing some things to get the kids involved? If you got younger siblings, having them maybe potentially give the adhan for iftar, or letting them help out in the kitchen, or having them decorate their rooms or whatever. So any sort of advice or tips regarding that would be really, I think, cool and beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't have any kids, but I have siblings. My little sister, she's 8 years old, and so getting them involved as much as possible is great. So if that means home, I think that's creating the excitement for Ramadan. If they are at the age, where they're maybe trying out fasting, creating some sort of like opportunity for them to keep track, right? Maybe rewards and incentives around the month of Ramadan is very important. And so creating some sort of rewards or incentives for them to fast or to do good deeds or keep track of the good deeds that they're doing. It's really cool because if you Google like arts and crafts activities for young children on Google, you're just going to come through a bunch of workbooks like coloring material, things that they can print out. So those are things that for my siblings that we've done in the past and that we're hoping that we can do this year as well too. Like playing, there's this bingo sheets, like there's so much alhamdulillah on the interwebs, but within the home but within the home, if I also one thing that we also do is like practice giving like Ramadan Mubarak gifts, or just like small things to just let our neighbors aware that we're celebrating the month of Ramadan. So whether they're cards, small cards, just telling them that we're observing the month of Ramadan, offering small dates, little goodie bags or stuff like that. I think those are not incentives, but those are things that gets the kids involved, and it just shows that we have pride in our blessed month, this holiday that we are welcoming, and we want our neighbors to know as well too, right? That we're fasting during this month, and we appreciate like just kind of that semblance of, because we obviously get gifts and we get cards when it's the holidays, whether it's Christmas time and whatnot, New Year's and stuff like that. So just trying to create something like that inside the home, I think, is a great way to get kids involved. Even helping out with iftar. I've been teaching my younger siblings like different baking tips, and so that I mentioned, like the last couple of weeks, these are things that are going to be put to the test when Ramadan comes, right? So you guys are going to be baking the cookies and the banana bread and stuff like that. And so it's a great opportunity, alhamdulillah. There's so much time that we've been given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it's just a matter of, I think, just obviously not all of us are going to do everything, right? But just realizing, okay, what can I do? What is the effort that I'm putting in? And just being content with that, right? Like we like to burn ourselves out, and I think that that's not the point of Ramadan. Point of Ramadan is not burning yourself out. It's looking for that acceptance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
So on that note, I think we covered a lot of different topics. Once again, Jazakallah khairan for your time. Barakallah feekum.
Absolutely.
I know tracking you down was such a challenge because mashallah, you're so involved in so many organizations and projects and things. And so it means a lot to us that you dedicated some time to be with us. And we love to, inshallah, to maybe have you back for future events. And inshallah, whenever Allah decides to open up the doors of his houses of worship and Masjid, we look forward to having you even in some evening programs and sisters halaqat as well. So
inshallah,
I hope everyone benefited. If you have any concluding remarks, inshallah, it was a pleasure to have you on this weekend.
Yeah, no, just jazakallah khair. I really appreciate it. I think it's part of our sunnah, right? Preparing for Ramadan and wishing well. The Prophet ﷺ tells us that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about himself that I am what my servant thinks of me. And I think that is if anything, that's just a great opportunity for us to just participate and anticipate this Ramadan. Is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is merciful. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has brought us into this Ramadan, inshallah, that he continues to bring us and allows us to reach the blessed month of Ramadan. That if we do meet it, that Allah intended this goodness for us to meet this beautiful barakah month. Then what can we do to make the most out of this month that I'm sure many people who weren't able to meet Ramadan, passing away, perhaps not fasting or not being able to fast, but more so for the people who have passed away before now, I'm sure they would be more than happy having a Ramadan, even if it meant, not being in the masjid, right? And so he's showing gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that is granted, inshallah, He grants us the opportunity to meet Ramadan next week, inshallah. And if we do find ourselves amongst the lucky ones, that we show that gratitude and that we do our best and we assume good of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Jazakallah khair, barakallah feekum. May Allah put more blessing and increase your knowledge. And inshallah, if you're not too busy, we'll have a conversation very similar to this in the future as well. I thought it was very beneficial, very fruitful. Inshallah, hope you and your family are staying safe amidst all of this. Like you mentioned, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to reach the month of Ramadan and allow us to show our gratitude for having reached it by making the most out of the situation that we've been given. And so, barakallahu feekum. Thank you so much.
Jazakallah khair.
Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa barakatuh.